Hey, welcome to Case Briefs with Megan. Let's make this case brief. We all enter this world and we all eventually leave it at some point. But how do you make sure that the things that you own while you're still living are given away to the people that you care about the most? Or they're just disposed of in a way that you'd like them to? Well, that's where we get into wills and trusts. What happens when you have somebody who sets a condition in a will in order for the beneficiaries to receive their inheritance? And that's something that we get to talk about in this case in RE Estate of Feinberg. Max Feinberg creates a trust for his beneficiaries, his grandchildren, to eventually inherit his wealth someday. But he sets one condition that is super huge for this case. Max is Jewish, and that's something that's really important to him that he wants to make sure is passed down throughout the generations of his family. So he sets this condition saying that his grandchildren either have to marry somebody of the Jewish faith or their spouse has to convert to Judaism within 1 year of the marriage. If they don't do this, then the grandchildren are going to be treated as dead. They will not receive an inheritance. Eventually, Max passes away, and his wife becomes the person that is in control of the trust, and she says that this religious belief, that clause in there, must be upheld, and then she eventually passes away, and now you've got this giant trust with a lot of money in it. At that point, the Feinbergs had 5 grandchildren, and some of the grandchildren had been married to people who were of the Jewish faith or had converted, and then there were some grandchildren who didn't do that and were looking for that inheritance, so they sued. Grandchildren argued that this trust clause puts such an unreasonable restraint on who they can marry that their choice is either they marry somebody that they may or may not love just to get the inheritance, or they marry somebody that they love, don't get an inheritance at all, and this becomes a matter of public policy. And that's how we get to the issue at hand. Can you have a clause like this in a trust that restricts the beneficiaries from gaining an inheritance? Surprisingly, the court says yes, you can have a clause like this. There's a couple of reasons for this that the court comes up with. The first being, this is what Max Feinberg wanted for his trust. The court doesn't essentially have to agree with what Max Feinberg thinks, but we know what he as the donor wanted for this trust, and it was that he wanted his grandchildren to marry somebody of the Jewish faith. The court can't just reverse that because somebody may or may not like that. That's a personal decision. The reason is that the grandchildren didn't actually have any vested ownership rights when Max passed away. Remember, when Max died, all of his property went to his wife, including the trust. The wife had the decision to decide on who would get what if there was an inheritance. The grandchildren didn't actually own anything in the inheritance yet. They just had the expectation that they would be inheriting something. Another important thing here is that by the time Max's wife passed away, all of the grandchildren had been married. They made the decision on who they wanted to marry already. This is where some of the grandchildren argue that this clause means that now they'd have to divorce their spouse if they are not a member of the Jewish faith. But the court instead looks at this clause and they say, no, because both of the Feinbergs have passed away, now we get to use this clause and look back and see which of the grandchildren qualifies. It's not actively telling you to marry somebody of the Jewish faith now or divorce your spouse if you're not married to somebody of the Jewish faith. This is just merely kind of a condition that we look back and see who qualifies now. So this wills and trust case is actually pretty important because the courts here show us that we have to have a balance between what does the donor want and what's important to public policy. For example, what if we had a similar clause that says you need to be married to somebody of the opposite sex, but the person that you want to give your inheritance to is gay? What do you do then? Learn anything from this case, getting good with your grandparent.